Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Still on the topic of the blood money, you'll remember previously we spoke about the head injuries. So let's give a few more words on this issue before moving on to the next topic. You will remember, dear listener, akramakallah, that we spoke about the minimum head injury which incurs the blood money, and that is the mudiha, the injury which exposes the bone. But before the mudiha stage, we can have other head or face injuries which are less severe than the mudiha. So what are these types of injuries? Well, the simplest of them is called the harissa, and this would be like a simple scratch on the face or the head. Then next up after that would be the diya. This means bleeding, or that which bleeds. So this is more than a scratch, it is a scratch which is deep enough to lead to a bleeding. Then after that we have the diya, and this is an injury which leads to a bleeding, but the injury itself leads to the flesh. So it is worse than the second type. And then after that, the third level is the mutalahima. This is an injury which is deeper than the diya. So whereas the diya just touches upon the flesh, the mutalahima goes deeper into the flesh. Then the fifth level is the as-simhaq. And this is the injury which reaches in between the flesh and the bone, because the flesh is on top of the bone, and so it reaches in between that place, and this is like a white covering. So let's just recap these 5 levels or phases. Number 1 is the harissa, number 2 is the diya, or also called the dami'ah with the ayn. The third one is the diya, the fourth is the mutalahima, and the fifth is the as-simhaq. With all 5 types of these injuries, there is no set blood money. Rather, we will look to the experts in this field and they will give a value to this injury, and that's how much needs to be paid by the perpetrator. So this is what we call al-hukuma, but it needs to be noted that the value needs to be less than 5 camels, because the mudiha incurs the 5 camels, so any injury from these 5 categories which we have mentioned needs to be less than 5 camels. So when it comes to those head injuries or face injuries which incur a specific blood money, then they are of further 5 categories, and we have mentioned this before, but let's just recap. The first one is the mudiha, and this is the injury which exposes the bone. So obviously this is going further deeper than the simhaq, and this incurs 5 camels, as is well known from the evidence. Then next we have the hashima. This is the injury which firstly exposes the bone, and secondly breaks it to a certain degree, or smashes it a bit. As for if it fractures the bone but does not expose it, then we have hukuma in this case. And for the hashima, the blood money is 10 camels. Then the next one in phase is the Monopylah, and this is the injury which moves the bone of the face or the head from its original position. And this incurs, as we found in the narration, 15 camels. Then next in phase we have the Mumma. It has the same root letters as the Imam. So the Imam in the Salah stands at the front. So the Mumma reaches the front of the brain, but it doesn't actually injure the brain in aught. And we know from the narration which we have quoted in Bulugh al-Maram that the blood money for this is 1/3 of the full blood money of the person. So for the man it would be 1/3 of the 100 camels, and for the woman it would be 1/3 of the 50 camels. After that we have the damigha, and the damigha is the injury which reaches the brain, but it will also injure the brain as well. So it would affect the upper skin of the brain. And the blood money for this is also like the ma'muma, it is 1/3 of the full blood money. So in terms of blood money, there's no difference between the ma'muma and the damigha. Damigha coming from dimagh, which means brain. However, some scholars have said that when it comes to a damigha, because it goes further than the ma'muma, you would need to pay 1/3 of the blood money plus some extra money for the extra piece of injury which you have caused. The Hanbali scholars, they say no, it is the same, it is 1/3, and they say it is just like if a person was to cut off the hand from the wrist, this would be half of the total blood money, but if he was to cut off the hand up to the elbow, let's say, then this would also be half of the total blood money. So it doesn't matter where he cuts it from, either way it will be half of the total blood money, and so they say this is the same. It doesn't matter whether the injury reaches the front of the brain or if it cuts the surface of the brain, either way it will be a third. However, this analogy could be questioned because when it comes to the hand, then this is one whole limb. So whether you cut it from the wrist or from the elbow, the limb is the same. But when it comes to this brain issue, then there's a clear difference between going to the brain but not affecting the brain, and the injury which actually affects the surface of the brain. It is not just one whole limb like the hand and arm. And the situation with the brain is far more dangerous and grave, because with the damigha you could seriously risk giving this person permanent brain damage. So the opinion which says that with the damigha it should be a third of the blood money plus extra, because of the extra injury committed to the skin of the brain, or the surface of the brain, then this is a good opinion. So these are 5 categories of the face and head injuries which incur a specific blood money. So in total we can say that when it comes to the head and face injuries, then they are 10 categories or 10 phases. The narrations which we have quoted also mention the Jaipha. The Jaipha is general. It is any injury which reaches inside the body. So if somebody was to stab you with a knife in your belly and it reaches inside the belly, then this would be a Jaipha, because it reaches the Jawf of the body. The Jawf is the innermost part. And we know that with the Jaipha, in the letter of Amr ibn Hazm, the Prophet ﷺ said that this incurs a third of the total blood money. As for the arm and the leg, then if you were to break off the arm and the leg, meaning split it up entirely, then of course we know that for each arm and each leg there is half of the full blood money. But what if you were just to injure this arm or leg, or to break it without making it split off? Then in a case like this, we would not give the specified blood money, but rather we would go by the hukuma. And the hukuma, as we said before, is that the victim is given a value without his injury, and then he is given a value after this injury which he sustained. So he's given a value as if he was a servant. And then this difference would be put as a fraction of the total blood money for that person, and this is how much the perpetrator would need to give. So if, for example, the victim suffers an injury to the arm, now if you were to break off the whole arm, then this would be half of the total blood money, which would for a man be half of 100, which would be 50 camels, or any equivalent value thereof. But what if he sustains an injury to the arm? Well, we would go by the hukuma. We would say, what is he worth without the injury? Let's say it is 60,000 dirham, and then with the injury it is 50,000 dirham. This makes a difference of 10,000. Now 10,000 as a fraction of the total value before the injury is 10,000 over 60,000, which comes to a sixth. So the fraction is a sixth. So the victim then deserves a sixth of the blood money. However, it needs to be noted that if we have a case where with the arm, let's say, the hukuma comes to more than half of the blood money, then this cannot be given, because cutting the arm off entirely would be half of the blood money. So anything less than that would need to be necessarily less than half of this blood money. And that is clear enough to understand. So if we have a case where the hukuma comes to more than the blood money for that particular area, so in this case we're talking about the arm, then this is not allowed to be given. It must be less than the specified blood money for that particular body area. The same thing can be said with the head and face injuries. These are the ashijaj, the head or face injuries. For the mudiha, we know it is 5 camels. Now if an injury is sustained less than the mudiha, so we will use the hukuma. But if when using the hukuma we arrive at more than 5 camels to be paid for an injury which is less severe than the mudiha, then we would not pay 5 camels. It necessarily must be less than 5 camels. However, on this issue, it is worth noting a differing opinion. This opinion says that with the hukuma, even if it does come to more than the specified blood money for that particular body part, then this is fair enough and we have to go by it. How do they say this? Even though we are taking more than the specified blood money, despite the injury being less severe. How do they justify this? They justify this by saying that the Sharia has left the matter down to us. which is why we are using the hukuma. If the Sharia has left the matter down to us, and so therefore we're simply following the Sharia because it's left the matter down to us, then any amount we come out with would have to be therefore followed, because we have not disobeyed the Sharia in arriving at this amount, even if it happens to be more than the specified blood money for that particular body part. So here then you could see we have two opinions in this scenario. If we are faced with a situation like this in real life, then obviously the Hakim would take the appropriate decision in accordance with what he feels to be correct. But what is the correct opinion in this issue? Well, we can leave the listener to decide for himself what he feels is most in accordance with the Sharia. Okay, let us now change the topic and talk about the aqila. Aqila comes from the word aql, which in this case means blood money. Remember we said that aql comes from iqal, which is the tying rope which you use to tie the camel, and this is because when the family of the perpetrator would pay the blood money to the family of the victim, then they would bring these camels, which is the asl for the blood money, and they would tie them to the house of the victim or the family of the victim. So who are the aqila? Well, in the book of the inheritance, you'll remember we spoke about the asaba. And the asaba are those male relatives who are related to you through at least the father. So as for those relatives who are related to you through only a female, be it either your sister or your mother, so in other words, they're just related to you through a single female, then these types of relatives cannot be your asaba, and hence they cannot be the aqila, because the aqila are from the asaba. And included in the asaba is also the relation of the wala. So this is the person who has freed a servant. He also inherits as the asaba. So he's also included from the aqila. So we know that the person who freed a servant can inherit as the asaba if this servant does not have any blood relatives. And so because of this relationship, the relationship of al-wala, the Prophet ﷺ said that the al-wala is just like the relation of the nasab, the blood relation. It cannot be inherited nor sold. So just like you cannot sell your brotherhood to somebody, you cannot tell somebody, pay me and you can be my blood brother. So we find that the mawla, or person who has freed you, if you were a servant, then he is from your asaba, and hence he is also from your aqila. So if you were to commit murder accidentally, or shibhul amd, then he will be one of those who has to contribute to the blood money. If he's not available, then this person's asaba, meaning the person who freed you, his asaba are liable for the payment. However, we ask the question, is the situation of the asaba in the inheritance exactly the same as the situation of the aqila in the blood money? Well, not exactly the same. In the inheritance issue, your closer asaba will inherit, and the ones who are further away, meaning related to you further away, they will not inherit, because the ones who are closer, they block off the ones who are further. You'll remember that we gave three categories in terms of deciding who takes priority when it comes to inheriting your wealth from the asaba. We said firstly it depends on the direction. So this would be the sonhood, the fatherhood, the brotherhood and their respective children, the unclehood, these are your paternal uncles, and also then the wala, the person who freed you. So these are the 5 directions in order of intensity of the asaba. Then if this is equal, we turn to the next phase, which is the manzila, or the status. So for example, your brother has more right to inherit than your brother's son, because your brother is of a closer manzila to you. Likewise, your paternal uncle has more right to inherit than your paternal uncle's son, and that's your cousin. Why is this? Because your paternal uncle has a closer manzila to you. He has a closer status to you. He's closely related to you, more so than his son. Then if the manzila is the same, we have to look at the quwwah, the strength of the relationship. And this is pertaining to your half-brothers and your full brothers. So your full brother has more right than your half-brother. However, when it comes to the aqila, then If those from your asaba who are more closely related to you are unable to pay because maybe they are poor, then we would turn to those asaba who are further away. So we don't have this idea of blocking as we do with the inheritance. So for example, if a man has paternal uncles who are poor, but he has the sons of his paternal uncles who are his cousins and they are rich. In inheritance terms, cousins will not inherit because the uncles are blocking them off, because the uncles are on a closer manzila. However, when it comes to the blood money issue, then because the uncles are too poor to pay, the sons of the uncles, meaning the cousins, they will have to pay because they're rich. Your father and your son are from the asaba, are they not? The answer is yes, certainly they are from the asaba, because in inheritance issues, they would take the remainder when the people of the fard have taken their share. Are they included in the aqilah? There are actually 4 opinions on this issue. The first opinion says yes, they are included in the aqilah, just as the rest of the asaba. The second opinion says no, they are not, and they will take their evidence from that hadith which we quoted, the last one in the chapter of the blood money. The Prophet saying, أَمَا إِنَّهُ لَا يَجْنِي عَلَيْكَ وَلَا تَجْنِي عَلَيْهِ, that he will not be responsible for the Jinaayah you commit, and you will not be responsible for the Jinaayah he commits. The third opinion is that the father or the grandfather going up in that line, they will be from the aqilah, but not the furu'. These are the sons and the sons' sons, and going down in that line. The fourth opinion is that both the usul and the furu' are from the aqilah, except if it be the case that the far', who is the son or the son's son going down in that line, is from a different tribe. So the man is married to a woman from a different tribe, and so this son is not totally from the same tribe as the father. Well then in that case, this son will not be from the aqilah, and they say because the system of the aqilah is based upon nusra, giving help to each other from your own tribe's people. And because he's from a different tribe, this nusra is not present anymore, because it is the people of the same tribe who will be like a family and they help each other and defend each other from someone who is other than them. However, the best opinion is the first one, because if the father and son are eligible to inherit from you, then they must also be liable to pay on your behalf the blood money for accidental or quasi-intentional murder. There are certain types of people who do not pay the blood money, and these are firstly the servant. This is because the servant does not have any wealth of his own, such that he could give anything of it away. So if a man commits accidental murder, and he has a relative of his who is a servant, then this servant is not from the aqilah. You'll remember the hadith, مَنْ بَاعَ عَبْدًا لَهُ مَالٌ فَمَالُهُ لِلَّذِي بَاعَهُ إِلَّا أَنْ يَشْتَرِطَ الْمُبْتَاعُ. If somebody sells his servant who has wealth, then the wealth of the servant belongs to the one who sells the servant, unless the buyer stipulates otherwise. So we find here that the Prophet has said that the wealth of the servant belongs to the seller, who is the master of the servant, of course. So in other words, the wealth of the servant is not actually his wealth. And by wealth, we don't necessarily mean money, we mean any possession. And likewise, the one who is not mukallaf. So if a person commits accidental murder and he has a relative who is not mukallaf, then this relative who is not mukallaf does not have to pay anything of the blood money. Mukallaf, of course, meaning baligh and aqil. So even if we have a relative who is a young boy and he's extremely rich, he still does not have to pay the blood money. Likewise, a relative who is insane, even if he's extremely rich, he does not have to pay the blood money. And one thing we can say in common between the servant and the ghayr muqallaf is that they are not from the people of Nusra, generally speaking. Meaning to say, they are not from the people you expect to help you when it comes to these issues of war or court cases or blood money. And likewise, if you have a relative who is poor, then we do not obligate him to pay the blood money on your behalf. What do we mean by a poor person in this case? Well, some ulama have suggested that in a case like this, the poor person would be the person who does not have enough money to pay the zakah after his basic needs have been met. So let's say the nisab for zakah is £1,000 and his basic needs are, let's say, £500. So his basic needs plus the nisab would be £1,500 in this scenario. Well, when it comes to paying the blood money, if he has £1,000 or more, he is rich enough to contribute to the blood money. If he has less than 1,500, he's not rich enough to contribute. Also, the person who does not pay is a female. So if a man kills another person accidentally and he has a sister, then the sister does not need to pay anything of the blood money. Because normally, females are not from the people of Nusra. They're not from the people of help and support when it comes to these types of legal issues, whether it be court cases or war. And also, from the family members who don't pay the blood money on your behalf is the kafir. So if you have a brother who is a kafir and you committed accidental murder, then your brother who is a kafir will not pay anything towards the blood money, because a kafir is not from the people of Nusra for the Muslim. And he's also not from your family, technically speaking. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, in refutation of Nuh alayhi salam, who said to Allah, Rabbi inna bani min ahli, my Lord, my son is from my family. And Allah replied back by saying, Innahu laysa min ahlik, innahu amalun ghayru salih. He is not from your family. Just a direct contradiction. His work is unrighteous. And we know of the hadith as well, that the Muslim does not inherit from the kafir, nor the kafir from the Muslim. So there is no relationship there when it comes to the nusra, nor when it comes to the mirath. So, thus far we can take that from the conditions of the aqila is that this person must be a Muslim, baligh, aqil, hur, which is a free person, ghani, which is a rich person, and dhakar, which is a male as opposed to a female. So these are 6 conditions so far. The 7th one, that this murder needs to be either accidental or quasi-intentional. So if it is purely intentional murder, then you, the killer, would have to pay for the whole blood money. But somebody might object here. They might say, but even in accidental murder or quasi-intentional, how can we obligate the aqila to pay the blood money? Is it not true that Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى وَإِن تَدْعُوا مُثْقَلَةٌ إِلَى حِمْلِهَا لَا يُحْمَلْ مِنْهُ شَيْءٌ وَلَوْ كَانَ ذَا قُرْبَى. That no one who bears a burden will be made to bear somebody else's burden. And if the one who is heavily laden with a burden was to call someone else to carry his burden, it will never be lifted from him, even if the one wanting to help him is a near relative. So with this ayah, how can we obligate the aqila to pay on behalf of the murderer? How can we make them bear the burden of the murderer? Well, the answer to that is quite simple. The ayah is speaking about the sins, so nobody will carry somebody else's sin. However, paying the blood money is not about sin, it is about helping other people. So this comes under the same category as when your relatives are poor and you pay for their expenditure. This is obligatory if certain conditions are met. So in the same way, you have to pay for the basic expenditure of your family members if they are poor and they cannot earn for themselves and you are rich. Then likewise, you have to pay for their blood money if it is accidental murder and all the other conditions are met. So we find then that in this idea of the aqila paying the blood money or contributing, there is nothing strange or peculiar about this. So that's the first reasoning. The second reasoning is, because this is accidental murder, it would be somewhat unfair for the murderer to pay the full blood money, because he did not intend to kill the victim. As opposed to if he intended to kill the victim, then we don't have any mercy on such a person and he has to pay the whole blood money. Some might object. They might say that if we allow this to happen, then some people might become reckless. For example, then somebody with a car, let's say, might drive recklessly on purpose. And if he was to run over somebody, this would be accidental murder and his aqila would have the burden. Well, we say in a case like this, if the ruler sees that a man is driving recklessly, then he can easily take his license away or take his car away. Basically, you can punish him in other ways. This is not an excuse to drop this law of the Sharia. What happens if the person does not have any aqila to pay the blood money on his behalf? Well, then he has to pay, even if it is in installments. If that is not possible, because he's unable to work for some reason, then we turn to the treasury of the estate. Okay, what about this situation? If a person kills a servant, do the aqila have to pay the blood money? Some scholars have said no, because killing a servant is like destroying somebody's wealth. Now, if you were to destroy somebody's wealth, you have to pay back. Your aqila don't have to pay on your behalf. For example, you're destroying somebody's computer or somebody's house. Your aqila don't have to pay on your behalf. And so the servant is much like the wealth of somebody. His blood money is actually his value. Other scholars say that the aqila do have to pay because you have actually taken a life. And because of this, you do have to offer the kefara for accidental murder, which is of course freeing a believing servant or fasting 2 consecutive lunar months. And because you have to offer the kefara, it means you have to offer the blood money, because they go hand in hand. And so if you have to offer the blood money, then this would be upon the aqila. So you can see here we have 2 differing opinions, and both are well argued. But perhaps the stronger opinion out of the 2 is that the aqila do not have to pay, because the blood money of the servant is not actually the blood money, it's just simply his value. So this makes the servant resemble some item of wealth. And if you were to destroy an item of wealth, then the aqila do not have to contribute anything. Also, the aqila do not have to pay for a sulh, which is a reconciliation. So for example, some people claim that one man killed their relative, and that person who is blamed, he denies it. So we have obviously an argument here. Now, to solve this argument or to solve this dispute, they arrive at a reconciliation. So the one who is accused, he pays some money to the accusers, which may not be as much as the blood money, but he pays something just to resolve this argument and this dispute, so that they can all get along fine with each other. So if a sulh like this is agreed, then the aqila do not have to contribute anything, because this is not the blood money which is being paid. So note the difference between the blood money, which is a diya, and a sulh, which is a reconciliation contract or a treaty. What about this situation then? That some people claim that a person has killed their relative, and the one who is accused, he acknowledges, yes, I did kill him. But the aqila of the accused do not believe him. So they do not believe that their relative is in fact the killer. Would we obligate the aqila to pay the blood money? The answer here is no, we would not, because this murder has not been established by way of any evidence. So that's the first point. And then the second point is, the only way it has been established is through the murderer confessing, but the aqila do not believe him, because they have their reasons to doubt. So if they do not believe that he is in fact the murderer, then we do not obligate them to pay the blood money. Rather, we say to the aqila that you have to look at the indications. If there are indications which suggest that your relative is in fact the murderer, then it is obligatory upon you to pay the blood money. If indications indicate otherwise, meaning the circumstantial evidences, then you don't have to believe this confession. Because otherwise what could happen is that one person could agree with other people that he has injured their relative unintentionally, and the aqila would pay the blood money, and then these people would share this money out in between themselves. So this is a little hila which they could implement. And also from the conditions for the aqila to pay the blood money is that the blood money must be over a third of the total blood money. So for example, if 3 fingers have been cut, then each finger is 10 camels. 3 fingers would be less than a third. So the aqila do not have to pay for 3 fingers, but if 4 fingers were cut, accidentally of course, then the aqila would have to pay this blood money, because this is more than a third. As for something like the Mumma or the Jaipha, which is a third of the blood money, then here the aqila would have to pay. So if it's a third, they have to pay, and if it is more than a third, they have to pay. But if it is less than a third, then they do not have to pay. And the evidence for this ruling is that this is the judgment of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, whose sunnah we ought to follow. And we may also reason it out. We could say that anything which is less than a third is a smaller amount which the perpetrator himself can bear the burden of. So from the conditions we have mentioned is that the aqila must be Muslim, baligh, aqil, hur, dhakar, ghani. This means they are Muslim, they are adults, they have their sanity intact, they are free, they are male, and they are rich enough. So these are 6 conditions. And the 7th one, it needs to be accidental or quasi-intentional murder. And the 8th one, the blood money must be a third or more for them to pay. Anything which is less than a third, they don't have to pay. When it comes to accidental murder, then as well as paying the blood money, you have to offer the kefara, and this applies to accidental murder and quasi-intentional murder. It does not apply to intentional murder. And this kefara is you giving the right of Allah Jalla wa Ala to him, because when you take away a life which is innocent, you actually take away one of the rights of Allah Jalla wa Ala as well. So in addition to paying the blood money, which is the human right against you, you have to offer the kefara, which is Allah's right against you. And as the Quran states, that the kefara for this in Surah An-Nisa is that you free a believing servant. If impossible, then you have to fast 2 consecutive months. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَإِن كَانَ مِن قَوْمٍ بَيْنَكُمْ وَبَيْنَهُمْ مِيثَاقٌ فَدِيَةٌ مُسَلَّمَةٌ إِلَى أَهْلِهِ وَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ مُؤْمِنَةٍ فَمَنْ لَمْ يَجِدْ فَصِيَامُ شَهْرَيْنِ مُتَتَابِعَيْنِ تَوْبَةً مِنَ اللَّهِ وَكَانَ اللَّهُ عَلِيمًا حَكِيمًا. And if he is from a people, between you and them there is a peace treaty, then the blood money must be paid to his family, and a believing servant needs to be freed. And whoever does not find this, then he has to fast 2 consecutive lunar months as a tawbah or a repentance to Allah, and Allah is ever the knowledgeable, the wise. But what about the small child, or the mad person, or the sleeping person? If they commit murder, obviously this is accidental murder, but do they have to offer the kefara? Well, the better opinion here is that they do not have to offer the kefara, because the kefara is a tawbah to Allah Jalla wa Ala, as the Quran states. But these 3 types of people, the pen has been lifted from them, so therefore they don't have to make tawbah to Allah Jalla wa Ala because they have not committed a sin. But they would need to pay the blood money because this is a human right against you. And when it comes to human rights against you, then the pen is never lifted. Some scholars have said that if a sleeping person commits accidental murder, then he does have to offer the kefara, because he is baligh and aqil. It's just that he had a mani' or a preventative factor which is preventing him from committing the sin, which is that he is sleeping, but otherwise he does have to offer the kefara. However, the better opinion is that he does not have to offer the kefara at all, because the pen has been lifted from him just as it has been lifted from the small child and the insane person. So therefore there is no tawbah upon him, because the kefara is a tawbah, as the ayah clearly states. What about if somebody kills himself intentionally? Does he have to offer the kefara? Some scholars have said, yes, he does, because when he dies, the money needs to be taken from what he has left behind and used to free a servant. However, this is a weak opinion, because if we say he has to offer the kefara, then we would also have to say that he has to pay himself the blood money, or at least the blood money goes to his family, and nobody's going to say that. And likewise, we do have a particular evidence where a Muslim, one of the Sahaba, Amir ibn al-Aqwa, actually killed his own self in a battle against a Yahudi. What happened was that he had a short sword, and instead of striking the kafir, he struck himself in the knee and he bled to death. So some people started to say that he has killed himself, so therefore his fighting is of no use. And some even refused to make dua for him. But when the Prophet ﷺ heard about this from Amir's brother Salma ibn al-Aqwa, the Prophet said that rather he is going to have a double reward, and that all his deeds have not gone to waste, which is what many people were saying. But the point is that the Prophet did not obligate any kafara to be paid from the money which Amir left behind. And when it comes to this idea of blood money, kafara and qisas, in a life for a life, then this applies to when somebody kills an innocent person, a person who the Sharia protects. As for somebody who does not have a right to live, like a harbi or a murtad, then killing them does not incur the blood money, nor the kafara, nor qisas. However, the killer can still be punished for taking the law into his own hands. What about if 2 people both accidentally kill an innocent person. For example, a road accident, two car drivers drive into one pedestrian. Then in a case like this, both of them would have to offer a kefara, one each. But as for the blood money, then only one blood money needs to be paid. So we do not obligate each one of them to pay the full blood money. Rather, if the blood money for a man is 100 camels, then they can both share in this, so they could pay 50 each. You could, however, argue that if both of these drivers are able to free one believing servant, then they could share in that. So it's not like they have to each free a believing servant, but rather they could share in that. Because we've had one accidental murder, so therefore this obligates one believing servant to be freed. You could argue like this, and it's a plausible opinion. However, when it comes to the fasting the 2 months, then you cannot argue like this, because you cannot say one person fasts 1 month and the other fasts the other month. Because the point is that 2 consecutive months must be fasted by one person, and that can obviously only be done by one person. So whereas with the freeing of a servant there is room for debate, we find less room for debate when it comes to fasting the 2 consecutive months. So this diya and kefara applies to all cases of unintentional murder, whether the victim is a Muslim or a kafir, as long as this person is ma'soom. However, note that Allah Jalla wa Ala tells us that if this believer is from a people who are enemies to the Muslim, then the one who kills this person accidentally, he just has to offer the kafara but not pay the blood money. And this would be a situation where a Muslim is killed and his family or his inheritors are kuffar who do not have a peace treaty with the Muslims, so they are harbi. In a case like this, the killer would definitely offer the kafara because he has killed a believing person, but he would not pay the blood money because the blood money would go to the victim's inheritors. But the victim's inheritors are enemies of the Muslims, so they would use this blood money which we have paid them to fight against us. And of course this does not make sense. So Allah Jalla wa Ala does not state that the blood money needs to be paid. Note what Allah Jalla wa Ala says, فَإِنْ كَانَ مِنْ قَوْمٍ عَدُوٍّ لَكُمْ وَهُوَ مُؤْمِنٌ فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ مُؤْمِنَةٍ. And if he is from a people who are enemies of you, and he is a believer, then you have to free a believing servant. But note that there is no mention of blood money. The blood money is only mentioned when this person is from a people you have a peace treaty contract with, because then this blood money will not go to a people who will use this blood money to fight the Muslims. As for intentional murder, then the correct opinion is that there is no kafara, because with intentional murder, it is far too great just to be covered up with a kafara. It is a major sin, and you have to sincerely repent, and a kafara is not good enough. And we find that Allah Jalla wa Ala does not mention a kafara when it comes to intentional murder. He only ever mentions it in unintentional killing. Okay, let's take some review questions. In total, we mentioned 10 types of head injuries. Recall them and their respective blood money. Question number 2. We mentioned 8 conditions for a person to be from the aqila. Recall them. Question number 3. We mentioned 2 scenarios where the aqila do not need to pay. Recall them. Question number 4. What is the difference between killing a ma'soom person from a friendly tribe or nation and a ma'soom person from a warring nation?